Welcome to the Dragonfly Rising podcast. I am your host, Dr. Tammy Dean. Thank you for joining me today as we continue to work together to make a difference. Let's explore how we can use our voice today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Dragonfly Rising podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tammy Dean. And I am so excited today. We have with us Kate Pohl. Kate is a high school history teacher from Normal, Illinois. And Kate and I had the opportunity to work together a few years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago at this point. I don't know. Time is a blur. You know that days go fast. Or days are slow, years are long. I don't know what that's the right saying. Yes, it is. So anyway, Kate, so excited to have you with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. And also, I almost waved as you introduced me, but once again, remembered that nobody would see that. So
That's okay. We can narrate that. Like,
okay.
I have air quotes,
There you
like,
go. Please note,
like,
I am waving at your audience.
I know. I did that in another episode. We were like snapping for somebody else. And I was like, and the
That's-
snaps are going. So we can narrate that as we go today. So as you know, I love each of the guests of the podcast to really talk about their equity journey, because I really do believe like this is a journey and it's a marathon, and it's not a one stop, like I did this and now here I am. But I would love if you would share a little bit about your personal journey around equity work.
Sure. It goes back quite a ways. I think I know this could be dangerous. Put me off. Well, you never stop learning. So the journey is
Yes.
long but good.
Yes, absolutely.
And I continues to this very day to still be learning in this regard. So I grew up in North Dakota, and I say that only because my high school, which was maybe, I'm going to guess 1,500 people, 10th to 12th grade,
Mhm.
and very, as you can probably guess, Bismarck, North Dakota, it was very white, pretty conservative, but there was a large indigenous population, and large, I'm saying that relatively speaking. And so in terms of racial minorities, that was the group that kind of spoke to me in a visible sense, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
So for instance, the optics of indigenous students in the school who were isolated, who had a higher absence rate than other students, who at the same time, the United Tribes Technical College is like right where I live, and they had this huge powwow every year. So there was also visibility in terms of, some cultural celebrations. So that was something I noticed right away. But I also didn't have a ton of experience just with any other sort of racial diversity.
Mhm.
Had a little bit of experience with, I had some gay teachers growing up, and
Mm.
that was absolutely unknown, or you were not supposed to talk about it. The teacher I'm thinking of in particular, who was one of my favorites. In fact, I majored in his subject for a year and a half. I did not follow through. It is not a subject I should be teaching. But
But he inspired you nonetheless,
he was
right?
so wonderful as a teacher that, yeah, that's where I started. And noticing, again, kind of later in life, thinking back of the things that he had to put up with, the silence, denial of his own identity, kind of became more apparent to me as I got to college. And then I guess the next thing to think about is, so I actually have an English major, even though I teach history and government now. And I hope they're not listening, but I did not have a good history experience in high school. It was a lot of memorizing dates and names and right.
Me too, girl. I used to, it was my least favorite subject. I hated history because
Okay.
of that, because I'm not a memorizer. But once someone like you, to be honest, right, like talks about history in this very powerful, meaning interconnected way, I'm like, oh, this is really fascinating and super cool. Why didn't we learn it this way? So,
Right.
I think that was just also, we're of similar age. I just think that was also part of instruction at
Yeah.
the time, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, really, unfortunately. So when I got to undergrad, when I got to my college experience, I went to a small liberal arts school, and I had to take a history class as part of,
Mhm.
a gen ed program. And I remember walking into that room, it was an 8 a.m. class, and I didn't even bother getting out of my flannel pajamas, put a baseball cap on, and sat in the back. And I'm a pretty good student, but I just thought, all right, I'll suffer through this. And I think it was 2 minutes before I had my head perched on on my
Mm.
arms, just enthralled by this professor. So if you're out there, Dr. Mike Mullen, you're my hero. Actually, I have a framed picture of he and I on my desk at school. I still adore this.
Oh, I
Uh,
love that.
yeah, he just made it come alive. And you know what it was is suddenly I didn't know this, but evidently women were involved in history. I had no idea,
I know.
right?
Crazy. A crazy
Right?
talk.
Right? Other than maybe you read a textbook and like Cleopatra or Elizabeth Cady, someone would get like a shout out in the sidebar, and
Yeah,
that's it.
Betsy Ross. She made
Betsy
our flag.
Ross. Yes, Betsy Ross, a
Susan
good
B.
one.
Anthony.
Yep, good one. Absolutely. So that as a student, that's where I kind of came alive and started to really think about equity.
Hmm.
Then my second teaching job, the first one I try not to think about, it was not a pleasant experience as a new teacher. The second one, so I was in Omaha, Nebraska first, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, then Omaha, Nebraska. And then interestingly enough, I went back to Bismarck and I ended up teaching at the high school that I went to, which boy, I never thought I would do. And that's when I really started to see things from a
Mm.
teacher's perspective in terms of our indigenous population. And actually, the thing that sticks out most in my mind is he wasn't even my student, but there was a student in the school. And as far as we all knew, he was the lone openly gay student in this school of about
Mm.
1,500 people. And some other students, male students, started a petition to have him kicked out of the locker room because they felt uncomfortable.
Oh,
It
wow.
was horrifying. Actually, this sounds like name dropping, and I absolutely don't mean for it to be. I guess this is a book recommendation. So
Yeah.
Taylor Brorby has recently written the book "Boys in Oil: Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land," and he went to this high school at the same time that I was teaching there. So I knew Taylor, and he talks about this incident in his book.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and how it hit him because he was not open about his sexuality at the time and
Mm.
kind of stood back and observed all of this. So, I wanted to get involved somehow. I was just, I don't know, it just hurt. And I'm saying that from a position of privilege because I'm not gay. But watching with this, the student had some good friends and had some help, but the most popular students in school were circulating this horrible petition as though their lives were difficult. I remember having a conversation with the principal who I had had so much respect for. And he actually said at one point, well, if this particular student could just tone it down a little bit. And I was kind of speechless because I was a pretty young teacher and I
Yeah.
just couldn't believe that he didn't recognize how alone and scared and brave and all of those things that this lone student could be. So what ended up happening, and I wish I could tell you how, I don't remember,
Mm.
is a number of students came to me. They wanted to form a group. Oh, I know what happened. Another colleague of mine also got involved
Mhm.
and wanted to put together a town hall that had it allowed all students, teachers, community members to talk about this, but it would be moderated and put together a panel, including the students with the petition. It was kind of like she was basically trying to attempt restorative justice before we had restorative justice. If
Yeah.
that makes any
It
sense, right?
does. It does.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it was really well done. And we found that after that, there were so many students that wanted to continue the conversation that I started a group called the Tolerance Legacy Project. And can I also just say, this was in the early 2000s. I fully recognize the problem with the word tolerance. I really do.
But, I mean, but I think that speaks to an important point, right? When we learn more and know more, we do better, right? So
Right,
it's, the intent,
right.
the intent at the time, there's
The
grace for
intent
that.
was really good. The word
Yeah.
choice was not.
Yeah.
Um, and these students were just wonderful. And what seemed to happen is the group became a magnet group for students who had identities that were other. I put that in quotes,
Mhm.
that had been othered and just wanted to be together and commune. And the next thing you know, we would do PR campaigns about something. We'd have a coffee house that was an open mic night. We would, it just became a place where students could belong that didn't feel like they belonged. And I'm not going to say it was a huge group, but boy, it felt good to provide that kind of support for those students.
You
It, it,
built a
it felt
community, like,
yeah,
yeah.
they built
They
the
okay.
community. Really, they did. I just had a space, and the power that a teacher has, that you have
Mhm.
a stronger voice, that I could be the channel for them and be kind of a protector to say, no, I'm going to protect this space for you guys to be able to talk and do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Um, and this, I'm not gonna get in trouble. It's many, many years have passed. For what it's worth, the student who started the petition needed a letter of recommendation from either an English teacher or a social studies teacher. And I had been both of his, so he did not have anyone to write him a letter of recommendation. I'm sure he's very successful in the world, and hopefully he has changed his ways and his values. But
Yes.
I said, sure, I'll write you a letter. You know what the first paragraph's going to be about is what you have done to this student here. But
Right.
anyway, and then I was quite a thing. And then I taught for years, and then I quit my job and moved to Illinois because by that point, I really honed in on history. I was
Mhm.
mad about it, and I only had a minor. So I went to Illinois State so I could get my master's in history, and that was life changing. Um,
Mhm.
since I didn't do undergrad in history, I had kind of gotten a taste of how great it was. And once I was in grad school, oh my gosh, it was, let's talk about post-colonial theory and Marxist theory and feminist theory and historiography, how the study of how history is written and how
Mm.
different historians using different lenses can elevate different voices.
Oh,
And
yeah.
what else I discovered, I hope I actually knew this before grad school. It supercharged this discovery was it's not just women who are involved in history. Indigenous people, Black people, Asian people, all of them were involved in history. And who knew?
Who
Right?
knew? Who knew there was more
Right?
than a Eurocentric perspective on events
Right.
in the world?
Ah,
So
It was the
crazy.
best thing ever. Not to mention just the people that I became friends with at grad school. And I realized Illinois State is in the Midwest. It's in the middle of the
Mhm.
state, and our community's not huge, but it was certainly much more diverse than any other place I had been to. So, even students that I went to grad school with. I remember going to my first quinceanera. I was like, what is this? This is amazing. I have never seen anything like this. I don't understand a word of what is happening right now. And it is beautiful and fascinating. And that sounds
Yes.
so naive, but it was really incredible in so many ways.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then of course, once I took the job at UI, where I currently work, I was first assigned to our freshman program, which is interdisciplinary,
Mhm.
and introduced to my now best friend in the whole wide world, who you've interviewed, Amy Raymond. And
Yes.
and she also introduced me to all sorts of new ways to think about writing and teaching. Being able to collaborate with people in different subject areas on curriculum is about the best thing ever,
Mhm.
because you think of things in whole new ways. And I would be remiss if I didn't say I also really like to read. And I could give you a list a mile long. Again, I hesitate to say this because I don't want it to come across as arrogance, like, oh, you have to read or else. I just really like it.
Yeah.
And it, I've come across so many wonderful books for all ages, right? Some of them are very academic. Some of them are
Mhm.
young adult novels. Jason Reynolds, if you're out there, and
Oh,
I'm single, man. I tried to tweet you once when Twitter was Twitter
he
to ask
just
him out.
released a new book
Oh, I'm a well
about
aware.
Langston Hughes. I know. I'm so excited. I have his whole collection. I'm a
Oh,
fangirl also. So
right?
Jason,
You're gonna
we
have to
we
fight me.
I just want to talk with him. I want to talk to him about his book, you know. Oh, it's
Yeah, so all
amazing.
of those
Yes. And he has like Nick
things.
Stone, Angie Thomas, like
Yes.
Tiffany Jackson.
It's amazing, right? And I so
Mhm.
in that way, I feel like a lot of my journey has been thanks to students.
Oh,
I didn't read young adult until I came students and librarians. God bless librarians.
the
And so I
librarians. Just
right?
my plug, right?
Major
Sorry.
shout out to librarians. I just thought,
Yes.
well, I'm not built for young adult and I don't like fantasy and sci-fi and realistic fiction that's not academic coming out of grad school. And man, was I wrong. Man, was I wrong. There is such good stuff out there. And there's nothing
Absolutely.
better than reading with your students to see, that's a piece of who they are when they share a book.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah. That's just amazing. I just love that it's this journey and that the opportunities that present itself in this journey, right? Which kind of leads to where you are today. And, going back, I just want to talk about the interdisciplinary part because
Sure.
yes. Well, one, I mean, full disclosure, y'all, like I had the opportunity to collaborate with them on this interdisciplinary team.
You
Uh,
did.
yes, I did back when I was the literacy specialist there at U High. But the power in bridging those connections between like our subjects don't exist in the world in isolation.
Yes.
They are in fact interwoven, and the way we've historically set up schools to have content in these silos really does a disservice to getting into the depth and nuance of how different pieces of the world influence another world, right? Like these things were happening in science, which influenced these historical actions
Right.
that took place, right? So
Right.
being able to connect a thread for students is it's just a powerful place to be, like an opportunity, I just think, to share with students. And I don't know, for me, I always feel like once you see that, you start to almost naturally continue to bring it in, right? If
Oh,
you're not,
yeah.
I don't know what you think about that.
Oh, absolutely. So, even though I no longer teach in our freshman program, I now teach mostly upperclassmen. An opportunity arose to teach AP government. I hadn't taken don't tell anyone this, she said on the podcast. Hadn't
Your
taken a
secret's
government
safe with
class.
us.
That's right. I hadn't taken a government class since ninth grade, and an opportunity to teach AP US government came up, and I thought, I want to try this. And
Mhm.
so that was a step. In order to do it, just scheduling wise, I needed to step out of our freshman program. So I now teach AP US government, US studies, and an AP comparative government class. Still adore the freshman program. And boy, have they rewritten that curriculum again in such a global, culturally responsive way. It's wonderful. What I miss the most is the daily collaboration. When I want it, speaking of literacy, or I teach lots of writing, but
Mhm.
all I'd have to do is turn my chair and say, "Hey, English teachers, I need some help. Tammy, I need some help." Or I have this text I really want students to read, but I know it's too difficult for them. How do
Yeah.
I help them? And I still work very hard to reach out to people to make those connections, but I do miss that they're not 2 feet away from
The
where I
ease
used to
of
sit. Yeah, the
the
ease of it, or just
turn the chair.
you're having lunch and you hear someone talk about what they're teaching or planning, and you could just interrupt. "Oh my gosh, that sounds great. We're about to do this. How can we connect?" And I just think it's so good for students to see learning becomes so much more authentic. And
Yes.
even if they walk out of my class and say, "Well, history's not my favorite, but I'll tell you what, I do understand why it's significant. I do understand why it's important."
Mhm.
I can only do that if I'm able to make connections to those other disciplines.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely agree. It's so important. In
Yeah.
fact, administrators, if you're out there listening, please, please, please create more opportunities for your teachers to talk to each other and to work
Yes.
together. Right? That we are our best resources, and
Yes.
we never get the time to do it. So
Yes. 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 That building in that intentional time, I think that's so important and a very important plug. I'm all here for that. Culture responsive leadership, y'all.
yeah,
That's it in
yeah.
action, right? Like, because then you also seeing your teachers as an asset and that time as an asset and their professional expertise,
Yes.
right? So, especially
Yes.
in the current climate of this my perception, we're taking away. a lot of the professionalism from teachers and their opportunity to really respond in the way that students need that, just kind of nationally
Yeah.
as a whole. So I do think that's one of the highlights of, being a lab school, being at University High School is,
Oh, yes.
the continued opportunity to refine and engage in best practice. And for those of you that don't know what a lab school is, essentially a lab school is connected to a university that prepares pre-service teachers. So it serves as a model and an opportunity for pre-service teachers to engage with high quality instruction from teachers, not HQIM as like the buzzwords out there, but true, like
Mhm.
in-depth critical learning and thinking. So these teachers put in a lot of work at these lab schools to support the educators coming out into the field as new teachers. So,
We
um,
try, but I should give a shout out to all of my fellow colleagues in out there that don't have the level of freedom I do.
mm,
So as I'm watching on a national level books being banned, which I just I'm having so much trouble wrapping my head around it. And a number of
yes,
those books that have been banned are books that I teach on a daily basis. Yeah, that are in my classroom and part of my curriculum. And I feel pretty safe in my curriculum, and
hmm
because I'm in that lab school environment, I get to teach those things. So yeah,
mm,
it's wonderful, and I'm happy to take on this challenge of reinventing curriculum all the time. But in lots of ways, I think my colleagues not in lab schools have a harder. They're
yes,
doing a lot better work, harder work than I am right now. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and the sad part for those of you that may not know, if you're sitting here thinking, yes, we don't like book banning either. Like, I think this is an opportunity to use our voice and speak out against it because it is, I think the statistic is like the majority of book bans have coming from a group of 11 people.
Yes.
Like 80, something
Yes.
like 80% of book bans, y'all, have come from like 11 people. So I want you to think about, and I'll have to check that statistic, and I'll link something on my webpage about this because I think it's just important to realize there's a tiny group of people influencing a huge trajectory. But, I also just got to say, because they're starting to rebel against the prolific, excessive book banning, and I am here for
Yeah.
it. I am here
Yes.
for the students. Like,
Yep.
yes, students. So,
Yes. Right.
right. So, you want to think about allyship. This is opportunity educators for you to step into this privilege, like Kate was just talking about, as a teacher, right? You hold more power than the students. And I don't know if people always think about allyship in that way, but this is a way to do that. Um, to seek out and support and use your power to push back against this small group trying to limit the things we read
Yep.
and read as
Absolutely.
students. So I had not intended for us to go there, but I love it because it's so important. It's so important. I do want to talk about, because there's a lot of great things happening with what you're doing with equity work with students. So I know there's a few of them, and that's super exciting. So you are involved with the Black Student Union, a Feminist Club, the Diversity Committee. Did I miss any?
I started co-sponsoring not in our schools this year too, but I'm kind of a sub. I feel like I'm a placeholder, but loving every second of it so far. So
Yeah.
for another colleague who had to take on more diversity work, and it was more time consuming than she realized, and said, "Will you help with NIOS?" And I said, "You bet. What can I
Yeah.
do?" Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also co-sponsor our Amnesty National group. So
Okay. Awesome.
social
Awesome.
justice is kind of important to me.
You think? You
Yeah.
think? Yes. No, but I love it. I love it. So I
Yeah.
would love just to hear some more about, like, what pieces, I don't know. I don't even know if you can do this, like, close to your heart. Like, what piece do you want to share with that work that you're doing with
Oh
others?
gosh. Okay. All of it. I love all of it.
I knew that. That's why I was like, I'm going to ask you a very hard question because
Yeah, I love
uh,
all of it.
I know where your heart is and it's in with all of it. So I just,
Well, okay, the newest one, and maybe this goes speaks to my own identity. So there's a little bit of selfishness to this, is the feminist club is really new. And
hmm
I have waited and waited and waited because it needs to be student driven, right? I
hmm
can't do it. Everything needs to come from those students. And so finally, a couple of students last year said, Miss Bull, we need a feminist club. I said, we sure do. What can I do to help?
You're like, I've
Um,
been waiting for this moment.
right. So they're very new. They're just kind of getting up and running. Um, but like I said, it connects to my own identity. I guess I'm excited about it because that is my lived experience, right? I am a white, cisgender, straight woman. And so in many, many circumstances, I have privilege and I understand that. But I'm also single, unmarried, 47 and happy. And most people, not most, I'm sorry, that's an overgeneralization, but there are still a fair amount of people, even in my
Mhm.
professional circles, who even if they don't want to acknowledge it out loud, think that there's some sort of failure in that. And I don't feel that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
I'm
that's,
also
societal
right. Yeah.
norms, stereotypes,
And
expectations.
yeah, and I'm also pretty confident. And even though I will always have things to learn, always read more books, learn from my colleagues, I think I'm fairly intelligent and I'm fairly good at what I do. And
Mhm.
I don't like to and I have strong opinions and I think they're informed opinions.
Yeah.
But when you are a woman who stands up with your informed, excuse me, opinions, and you're willing to speak up, and I'm sure you've never heard this before. You are aggressive. You're not assertive. You're not confident. You're
Oh,
not diligent. You're aggressive.
I'm aggressive. I'm assertive. I'm
Yep.
not humble. Could I
Right.
humble myself?
Right.
What?
Yes.
Like, excuse
Yes.
me, like, would you say that to a man?
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
you want me to be less smart.
Right. And by the way, one of my this has been years and years and years, but a person I considered one of my closest friends. When I went to grad school, I went back to North Dakota to visit, and he and a number of others who I was so excited to tell them about the experiences I was having. I was just so excited. So I was home for a holiday break, and the first question they asked was, "Have you met him yet?" I said, and I knew what they were asking, right? I knew what they were asking, and I thought, "No, just ignore it
Yeah.
and start talking about a class that you like or a professor or what Illinois is like." They had been to Illinois or
Mhm.
Chicago. I had never been there until I moved here. And I tried to talk past it. And one of them actually put his hand on my hand and said, "It's okay. It'll happen. You'll meet him." I thought, do you really think that's what I'm going to school for? And that was followed by
That's why any good girl goes to school
right.
to meet her future husband.
Right, but if I am not kidding, it then went further. I tried to change the subject, and just out of left field, he said to me, "Well, if you could just dumb it down a little, I think you'd stand a better chance." I know, right? Like learning is so much a part of my identity. I thought, "Are you kidding? You've just told me to close down some of my identity to meet a man. Like, what are you doing?" It was
Not that the
oh,
man should respect and love and
right.
honor that part about you.
Right,
Like, you
right.
need to change who you
It
are,
yeah, it's
because
just
that's
so
intimidating
heartbreaking.
to us men.
Yep, that's exactly what the message was. I had come across it in grad school with some good friends. I'd come across it teaching. I should also add, by the way, my parents have been happily married for like 54 years, my brother for like 26 or 7. I have lots of happily married people in my life, so this is not me railing against marriage. It's just you can be happy as a woman pursuing education as well. And what I've found as a high school teacher, sorry, I'm talking way too much about myself, but what I've found as a high school teacher, and I mean, we know this, there is research behind this that when young women get to be about eighth or ninth grade, I think it's actually younger these days, they start to shut down in the classroom.
Yeah.
They're experiencing puberty, suddenly being smart, participating, being interested in class is social suicide. And
Mhm.
so they really start to close in. And it just killed me. So I spend lots of my time trying to model for young women in my class. Number one, you don't need to apologize when you're going to make a comment, right? Every single comment starts with, "Oh, I'm sorry, but let,
Or
let
I
me
just
hedge." I
Just
just, this is probably wrong, but no, let's not do that. No, let's not. I do need you to be informed. And if you are wrong, well, sure, then you need to back up and rethink where you're coming from. Of course you do. We all do.
Mhm.
And so that was a long answer to say I'm very excited about this feminist club. You should hear some of their ideas. Teenagers are just the best. So
They are. They
they
get a bad rap too.
they're incredible. Right? They're just incredible. Well, they're just these little sponges. And I realize, and people my age, our age, I'm going to put you in this category too.
We're the same
We
age.
right? We get closed-minded. We get set in our ways. And even though teenagers struggle to grapple with some of these things, they are willing to grapple. Right.
Mhm.
So their frustration to me, and even sometimes their immaturity, it's even kind of hopeful that they're really struggling with something new. And that's a pretty exciting thing to watch.
Yeah.
So at you should have seen our first meeting this year. And I had nothing to do with this. I just sat and enjoyed the show. Our president and her officers did a four corners activity. And it was
Mhm.
just, it's supposed to be an icebreaker to welcome in. You've got freshmen and seniors, and everybody's a little nervous. And what are we here for? And so it was, I strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. Go to the corner, right? The first question is like, a hot dog is a sandwich. Very silly. Pineapple belongs on pizza. And then she scaffolds. She didn't know
Mhm.
that's what she was doing. But her next question was, she said, this one's just going to be, no, I think it was four corners. She said, um, I have chosen to not to participate in activities because of my gender. And
Oh.
every single person in the room, they all kind of watched each other and all of them went to agree. Every single one. And she went, okay, is anybody willing to share? And the next
Mhm.
thing you knew, that the upperclassmen went first and then the freshmen really started to open up. And it was the most incredible experience. And they kept going from there, talking about, I yes, I haven't joined this. I'll skip ahead. So here are some of their goals based off of this
Yeah.
opening activity. They want to help each other engage in what have typically been male spaces. So for
Mm.
instance, in a classroom discussion, one young woman said, well, I was in a small group with a bunch of guys, and every time I'd bring up an idea, they'd kind of dismiss me. And then again, I tried not to laugh because you and I know this experience so well. She said, and then 2 minutes later, one of the guys would say what I just said, and everybody thought it was a great idea.
Oh,
Right.
I think every woman may
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too grandiose to say every woman,
I
but
don't
maybe
know.
not. Every woman's probably experienced that. I mean,
Right.
I would say, at least as middle-aged women, for sure.
Right. Right. So then they started to strategize. Okay, what can we do for each other in a classroom to elevate women's voices, or how can we help you? And then it was, I wanted to go to the weight room. I'm nervous. All right, let's have the feminist club go to the weight room and let's all go lift weights and
Mhm.
let's, I want to go change a tire. They also want to do things like learn about female role models. They're
Mhm.
very, very particular about recognizing intersectionality. So,
Okay. Oh, that's
which
wow.
was, yeah, it was really great.
Mhm.
So this president said, let's look at some ground rules as we have discussion. If you are a woman, if you say you are a woman, you are a woman. This is not up for discussion, right? Like it was great. And we do have some transgender students in this group.
Mhm.
And she said, I recognize she's white as well. And she said, I recognize that Black women's experiences may be different than my own.
Mhm.
We need to talk about that too. We need to make space for all of those conversations. Again, I just provide the space. I'm just sitting in the back of the room trying not to jump into the conversation because it's so great.
Can we make a grown woman feminist club and
Yes, I'm in. Let's start
Right.
it right now.
Let's get an women educators or just
Right.
women feminist club because it's I think about this because even though like education is historically a female dominated space, the males the I don't even know how I want to say this. It seems that the people given the eventual power, if you will, are males more often than
Right.
females,
Of
right? Like, so the
course.
males that are in there, right? So so even in a predominantly female profession.
It's amazing. It's amazing how patriarchy works.
Yeah, no,
Right.
wow, these kids, like,
Yeah.
oh, this
They're
just, like, warms
amazing.
my heart, right?
Oh,
Like,
yeah, and even better, Soo Jung Han, who's a psychologist. This is one of many great benefits of working through a university. So she's in the psychology department, and they have started something called the Body Project, which is to help. It was initially targeted women, and I think it's gone beyond and to go after. Oh gosh, everything from media stereotypes and media messaging and about body type and about body image and I think it was initially for eating disorders, but it is extended well beyond that. And you go through this training, but they're training students. So students learn, for instance, Amy Raymond, who I had mentioned earlier, she and
mhm,
I are the faculty sponsors. Again, we really just sit in the back while we're
mhm,
told by the professor, you guys need to keep quiet. This is for the kids, not you. Because we
uh-huh.
can't we can't not jump in. Um,
Yes.
yeah, but they'll talk about like how can you change the script? So let's say
Mm,
I'm in the bathroom and a young woman. I always think of the scene from Mean Girls where they're
mm,
all looking in the mirror and the
uh-huh.
first one, yeah, I my pores are too big. My this is this, and they all look at Lindsay Lohan's character like, what do you hate about yourself? You
Right.
that's how you can be part of our fellowship of women. And so one of the things that you would do in Body Project is, okay, how do I stop that script? How do I interrupt that when I hear fellow students saying such negative things about themselves? It's incredible, this training. I'm just giving you one tiny example of it, but our feminist club has started to really move into the Body Project sphere as well to spread the good word, if you will. So it's just
Yeah.
really, really exciting to watch.
Oh,
It just makes me really happy.
I love that. I love
Yep.
that. And to me, it's also when you think of women, um, gosh, I don't even know how I want to say this, like doing life differently than society thinks is acceptable for
Right.
women, right?
Right.
That to me is also a form of representation, right?
Yeah.
I always come back to when we show up as our whole self and our powerful self, we provide the opportunity and space for someone else to come in and show up as their whole self and be
Yeah,
unapologetic
exactly.
about our whole self.
Oh,
And,
that's it.
you know, and I think we owe that to students, right? And it and I say that like it's not scary sometimes to do that. I think it is. And how do you think about what is that one thing or like what is that one next thing that I can do? It doesn't have to be a huge thing.
Mhm.
Um it's enough to show and start this journey or continue this journey if you've started this journey. I think that's just always a point of reflection. Like, how am I showing up as my whole true self? And how am I making space for the students or the educators around me if you're an educator leader, like
Yeah.
to show up and be their whole true self?
Yeah. I I think that's one of the most important things I do, that is so well said is and I also agree with you that that is a scary thing to do. I'm not stupid. I'm sometimes, even though I think it's improved dramatically, and I also have some pretty wonderful male allies in my life,
Mhm.
many, as a matter of fact.
Mhm.
But I also know that when I speak up, there are certain people in a room, faculty, that are going to roll their eyes and say, "There she goes again. There she is being aggressive." They're not going to say it to me,
Mhm.
but I also know that they're probably not going to take seriously the things that I have to say,
Mhm.
and I have to be okay with that. It's not fair that I have to be okay with that, but my other option is to be quiet, and that is not an option I am willing to embrace. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but again, to your point, it's scary, and that's the model I want to provide for my female colleagues. It's the model I want to provide for my students. But I mean, come on, let's be honest here. That doesn't mean that there haven't been nights that I come home and fall apart. I'm going to
Oh,
try to not do it in front of the students, but that doesn't mean that it's always easy to do.
Oh,
So
absolutely, absolutely, and I would say just even for myself, right? Even having historically been, like,
yeah,
just me, right? And, like, kind of willing to speak when others wouldn't speak, and it's just an innately a part of who I am, like, I can't not
yeah,
speak, but I have found, just I say this to share, I guess, and be vulnerable with other people that may be thinking this, right? Like, where I'm like, "Maybe this time I'm just gonna be quiet. I'm just gonna keep my mouth closed," like, because I find myself preemptively explaining intent, like, "I need you to
yes,
understand that my
yes,
questioning my questioning or my directness isn't negative, it's coming from a place of wanting to know and understand and question and collaborate, but because I am a woman, and then on top of that, a minority woman, not just a
yeah,
woman, right, in an equity space, like, dealing with all of those nuances and intersectionality of experience, right? I find myself having to preemptively do that, and I don't like that
yep,
because I know if I were a man, and we're really not trying to bash on you men, we appreciate you, but it's like, it is it's true, right? I really promise I'm not. I love adore you.
yes, oh
Appreciate those
sure,
are allies, absolutely, but I'm thinking from a society perspective. If I
hmm,
were a man, I wouldn't have to do that.
yes, right. And to your point, again, that we're not here to men bash. It's more about this kind of awareness campaign,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Um,
yes.
so I got to give my dad a shout out. So have you seen the Barbie movie?
Oh, absolutely, I've seen the
Okay, hey,
Barbie
yeah,
movie. Hey, Barbie.
that's right. Hey, Barbie, love it. I adore it
Mhm,
for many, many reasons. And my 76-year-old dad, first, my mom went with a bunch of her girlfriends and I raved about it. And he said, I think I need to see it. And they don't live here. But afterwards, my mom took him and I said, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I need to not be judgmental of my father, who I have a really good relationship with, if he doesn't love it. And I wish I could remember the exact message, but I texted him afterwards. I waited 24 hours. It was killing me. I knew when the movie ended, I was like, wait for him. Don't be pushy. And and the next morning I said, well, I said, you can be honest. It's okay. We were just texting. He
mhm.
said, what'd you think? And again, I'm paraphrasing. He said it more articulately than I'm going to, but he said, I feel like I went to somebody else's religious service, that I went into a different cultural space that was not my own.
Mhm.
I just wasn't aware. He said it was very cerebral. I guess I just didn't know that women were experiencing things in that way. Um, and in that way, I think there's something I'll never be able to connect with you on, but I'm really glad that I got that 2 hours of perspective. And
Mm.
I wrote him back and I said, Dad, you could not have given me a better response than you just did. I was like, that's what I needed you to see is, no, maybe you can't experience this in the way that I do.
Mhm,
But now it's been made visible to you in this
mhm,
particular moment. Like that's it, right? That's what my feminist club girls want to do is make things visible. That's what
mhm.
I want to do in a faculty meeting is make things visible.
Yeah.
And to your point about thinking so clearly about just scripting your intent before you make a comment. Oh
Mhm.
my gosh, can I relate to that? I had a meeting with a couple of guys that were working on a project and I adore both of them. They're both excellent educators,
Mhm,
but they have been overlooking some things that have been disconcerting to some of my female colleagues. And so
mm.
we were going to meet and I needed to have I needed to make them aware of this. I think I practiced that conversation for about 2 hours before I went into that meeting, thinking, how can I politely deliver this message? And by the way, they took it really well
Yeah.
and have said, please keep doing this. We needed to know this. This is great, but it's just awareness. That's how privilege works. It's that absence of inconvenience. And
Yeah.
I'm quoting, that is not me. I'm forgetting, I can see his face and I'm forgetting the scholar that said that. But just things I don't have to think about. And so I don't see them. And that's it. That's what all of this is about, is that's something that students are also very capable of, is
Hmm.
seeing something that they didn't see before.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
we can do. That's all we can do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. Wow, what an amazing conversation so far with Kate. That brings us to our time, though, for today's episode. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank you, Kate, for joining me today and sharing with us about your equity journey and the work you're doing with the students at U-High, and the amazing things that these students are doing within the Feminist Clubs. Listeners, I'm going to encourage you, please go check out the website. I have links there for the resources that we mentioned today, as well as the books. We will continue our conversation with Kate in our next episode, diving a little bit deeper into planning around history and history instruction as it relates to equity. So I want to thank you all for joining in and listening today. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and let other educators know about what we're talking about. I encourage you to please go out, use your voice today, and hit me up on Instagram or on Facebook and let me know what you want to hear more about. Thank you all and have a great day. This wraps up another episode of the Dragonfly Rising podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tammy Dean. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember that action is always greater than inaction. How will you use your voice today?